Yes, hello. Welcome to this episode that has the title The Enigma of God. That's kind of bold title, but I will try to introduce it, to narrow it down, what I'm about to say something about and what I'm about to say nothing about, so to speak. This is a subject that I've been of some reason it's a kind of at the core of what I'm often speculate and think about nowadays, and I'm not trying to say anything out from a personal belief. My point or my perspective is from a psychological point of view. Though I would say I have a great respect for the subject, but it's not. I'm not trying to say something out from a, what do you say, theological or ontological perspective. I have put together some slides today that I will show on the screen, and then I will be up in the left corner. But first I will give this introduction. This spring of 2020, I've given an overview or a presentation of a study I did that was finished some years ago. It was a study on New Age spirituality and psychology. It was a study to become psychologist in Sweden. So that's my occupation. I'm a clinical psychologist. But the subject for that study was in the border between spirituality and psychology. Psychology of religion, you could say, but I'm not very into that subject. So I don't claim to have an academic knowledge in the field of psychology of religion. But there's something more I want to say before. I have struggled about an hour now to get the technique working, so I'm a little bit disorientated here. But I hope you can stand this confusion. Yesterday, I happened to watch two things on television, YouTube. That in the end of the day, I realized that both those two things I've been watching had relevance for what I was about to talk about today. And the first thing was an online lecture with a man called, I have it on the paper here. His name was Brian Swimme. The title was Journey of the Universe. And I wasn't familiar with Brian Swimme before, but a friend of mine sent me the link, and I watched it for about 15 minutes. And I looked this man up on Google. He's a professor, writer. He's working at the Integral Institute in California. It was very interesting to listen to. Very fine lecturer. Mesmerizing in some way. It was a good quarter of to get to know a little about what he was, what his main interest was. It's hard for me to recap because first of all I didn't see the whole lecture and but it was something about that Swimme had the feeling. It was not just a feeling. He's a well-trained scientist, so he had a lot of things to build on. But a feeling that mankind is at a sort of transition into a new and wider understanding of the universe. I think in the further on, there's even those questions regarding: is there a God? Is there is the universe in some way personal or creative? But somehow that lecture didn't catch me, and I will get back later to why I think that is. And then I stumbled upon a TV program. It was a Danish program. We have the same program in Sweden, but this was imported from Danish television. It's called Spårlöst, and in English that is something like Lost Without a Trace. It was about a young woman in her late 20s who went out with some help of professional sort of detectives to find her father. She had never met him. She knew that in the late 80s, I think her mother were in London. She met a man. She got pregnant. Then they separated, went apart. She gave birth to this little girl, and this mother never saw this man again. And this woman, Ditte, I think her name was, she said all her life she had been thinking of her absent father, longing for him, and that she wanted to meet him. And in this program, I didn't see the whole. I was I entered the program somewhere in the middle, but so we're able to see it to the end. These professionals, or these talented sort of detectives, were able to find this man, who now was an old man. He lived somewhere in England, Britain. And in the end of the program, this woman Ditte and this man met. And it was very moving. You could understand that it was of course, a moving encounter between the two, but you as a viewer was very moved as well. And those two things I watched yesterday, I realized that dealing with the subject of God, even if God is part of the subject in the first program with Swimme, and it's not mentioned, it's not even implicit a part of the other program with this woman and his father. To me, that Danish program is closer to what I would like to talk about. Yeah, that was long story about these two programs. And I think that why I'm not that thrilled about the Swimme lecture is not because I think it's wrong. I don't even think it's without interest, or at the contrary, I believe or I'm quite open to the possibility that they are on a search that is of great value, has a value, is of great importance. But what I will get to in a short while, I myself have a long-term involvement in the alternative spiritual world, culture, and that lecture by Swimme and those perspectives, visions, is I'm somehow so used to it, and I'm not claiming that I have so I haven't looked through it, I haven't grasped it all, and it's without interest in that regard, but it's more like that New Age spirituality is so fascinated of these kinds of perspectives. and I myself is a little bit fed up with it, to be honest. But that's a personal thing. It's yeah. So therefore, that subject is not attractive for me. But I will show you an agenda I have for today. And this is some of the things I would like to go through during this broadcast. I think intro I have pretty much covered. Psychology. Yeah, here's a picture. I used it last week as well. It's I suppose an old occult picture trying to display or picture this the world as we know it, the world of nature science and common sense within the bubble, and then by the knowledge or the information from the New Age alternative perspective, you have the ability to sort of put your head out of the bubble and you see a world order of great what do you say? Yeah, a world order, like a machinery, laws of nature that goes beyond what we within this bubble think there are laws around. For example, the formation of your destiny and such. This is, I haven't translated this, but it's a model or a sketch I made many years ago when I was sort of planning this study I made. And what it says, some words are similar in English, I believe. Kyrkan, church, New Age spirituality of a more organized fashion, and then you have New Age more unorganized fashion. And down here is the Druids and the Wicca, which was not of main interest to me doing this study, because what I was interested in and what I sort of conceptualized as the core beliefs within New Age spirituality, that was my that I wanted to understand or to make the study of. Those were the beliefs of reincarnation, karma, and the belief that the individual through the laws of karma, your own action coming back to yourself as an education, that is, and reincarnation, that you have a practically unlimited amount of time, because you're gonna live a life after another, and that's a reincarnation that is somehow different from other models of reincarnation, because you don't go back in your evolution, so to speak, but you continue evolving. There are hard times and there are better times, but at the whole you keep on progressing towards, and that's the third belief, towards fulfillment of emotional and cognitive abilities. You are about to reach a state of total God-likeness, to be like God, a God in the end. So those are the three core beliefs. And at the top of this, in this gray area, I have the word holism, and that's a sort of surrounding it all, that everything and everyone is connected to each other, and that makes things like telepathy and distant healing and things like that possible. It's just a few things that holism makes possible, but everything is connected. That's sort of holism, as I understand it, and out from this New Age thought system. But we go further, see what we find. Yeah, I would like to give a short. I did it the last week as well. Now I have translated that slide and I will go through it again. That's because I think this is important. It has a value in itself. It is what it is. It's kind of a result of this study, but it's at the core of my own approach to this subject. And I really like that to be known, so to speak. I did an interview study around what you can say is man's existential conditions. And one can argue, what are the existential conditions of a man? But I used some quotes from experienced psychoanalysts, and I came up with a sort of list. I think it was 7 or 8 conditions that were, so to speak, in the background for me conducting those interviews. So it was not like I put this list in front of the person I interviewed and asked them to check or uncheck. They were sort of in the background for me conducting these interviews, dealing with everyday life, like how my interview persons looked upon subject as love, friendship, responsibility, aging, and many things. It was what you call a half-structured interview. So there were long interviews, so altogether it was about 20 hours of interviews that I've then transcribed and tried to see patterns within. And I think those existential conditions, like you're alone, we are dependent of each other, we are limited when it comes to strength, abilities, time. Our bodies are, when we get older, our bodies gonna show signs of this, and you get older, and in the end you die. So it was those kind of truths that if you talk to like the normal person, if they had a chance to sit down and think over it, they maybe will come up with sort of these conditions. If they're not into New Age spirituality, that is. Because the result was that this group, these 11 persons, that all had a firm belief in this sort of spirituality, and they approved to these core beliefs that I showed you earlier. I read from the slide now when it's translated. The group protested, sort of. Of course, it was. You can nuance these things, but sort of. The group protested against all of man's existential conditions. They had a way of thinking that sort of outruled these conditions. They explained them in another, better way. The condition were all part of a illusion that we all are living within, the bubble, so to speak. And as a psychologist, or out from psychological point of view, that attitude towards the existential conditions can be or is alarming, because it's awakened the question that how is life as an adult living in this world? How is it working when you're not approving to these conditions? Within psychology, that is these conditions is something you gradually come to accept while you're getting older, growing up. As a child, you don't approve to them. You know, you're not what do you call it, conscious about them. That you could call it, you are omnipotent or limitless, and that's the way it's going to be. It should be. But while you're getting older, life is sort of putting you in your place and showing you what are the limits for your life and what are the limits for you, so to speak. So how is life gonna be as a grown-up if you don't accept these conditions? And even though I don't have any studies to support this claim, but I would say that many people who seek help within psychotherapy, or they end up within psychiatry, in some way is in conflict with these existential conditions. And that was when I set out to do this study. I build on previous studies and ongoing studies that had found that this New Age population, or this group, people who have this belief system, I'm not going to go into that too much, but they showed signs of, or their results were similar to those results that you otherwise find in a clinical population, where you had been able to study more in depth. So that was sort of earlier research that pointed in that direction that I'm talking about now. But this is the most important. that if you want, you can stay with the first sentence. If you are a more harsh observer out from psychology, you maybe stay there and say, this is crazy, this is unhealthy. But within this little group, I thought I were able to grasp some differences. But this group was too small to actually say something about that. But so when I speculate about this, I also I rely on my own experience from this alternative culture throughout a great deal of my adult life. And hypothetically, this group of person that on a verbal level protests against the existential conditions. On a verbal level, they say about the same. But within that bigger group, you are able to find differences. And hypothetically, these differences I divided into 3 groups. And this is at the core of my own approach to this subject, so to speak, this field. Group 1, those who are very disorientated, already before getting in touch with the New Age spirituality. And this spirituality will allow them to remain in that state. Group 3 is those who are psychologically mature. I write here, maybe I can find a better word, but and therefore they can find a healthy balance between theory and practice, between their beliefs in the New Age systems, or at least a great fascination and an interest, and their emotional reality. The group that has interested me the most is group number 2, and I write, those who are normally sick, normally healthy, and the New Age spirituality can tempt them with not having to continue this struggle. So the first group, you can say, they deny man's existential conditions and deny on I believe on a deeper level. It's I suppose that often that relates to really rough experiences growing up in the early relations, and so it's not really foremost a philosophical protest against these existential conditions, but it's more a deeper rooted thing. Number 3 is those who have reconciled with man's existential conditions, while number 2 is those who struggle with man's existential conditions. Yeah, that was long but short. I go on. This is a quotation that I have almost as my personal motto when it comes to these things. It sums up what I tried to describe in the previous slide. It's Allport and Ross, Gordon Allport and his colleague. It's an old article. And they say, to know that a person is in some sense religious is not as important as to know the role religion plays in the economy of his life. And this is a painting from Sweden. Maybe there are similar paintings in other parts of the world, I don't know. But it's sort of depicting an old feeling or experience of our time in life. I think it's beautiful. Now I will move over to the a little about the psychologically way of looking at these things. For some of you, it's well known, but I will go through it anyway. Sigmund Freud was a skeptic, a critic of religion and being religious. I didn't find any quotation in a hurry to give an example of his critique, but it's pretty well known. 100 years ago, his way of looking upon people being religious, having a belief in God and such, was that they cling to an old pattern, being a child, having the protection and the guidance of your parents, and to Freud, continue living like that was a great limitation, and to grow up was to stop believing in God and such. So that was, he was kind of harsh when it comes to belief in God and such. These are just cartoons. It's not about religion, but it's it's a picture of the seriosity and energy with which Freud explored his field, and he saw himself as a conqueror, someone who has to fight to get through, get to the truth. So it's just funny pictures. And in the beginning, when if you would like to study and become a psychoanalyst in the circles around Freud. In the beginning there were just circles around Freud because he was the starting point of it. If you were a believer, if you had a faith, you better keep that for yourself, because in the beginning of the psychoanalytic project, so to speak, 100 years ago, that was seen as a weakness if you had a belief. So you better don't tell anyone, which was a contradiction to the method itself, because you were supposed to be open towards your own analysts and your the people who guided and were about to teach you. You were supposed to be open, but there you have to be seclusive, not to be expelled. Yeah. But later on things changed, and here's a more contemporary writer. I don't know that much of this man. He's into psychoanalysis, but I'm not sure he's an analyst himself. But this was from a book called I don't have it here, but it was a book dealing with the religion within the psychoanalytic movement. And this is important. James Jones writes, "For Freud, atheism was normative. The mature person was ipso facto an atheist. So convinced was he, on these grounds, of the falsity of religion, that he failed to notice that just as there can be a psychoanalysis of belief, so there can be a psychoanalysis of unbelief. Just as there are neurotic reasons for believing in God. And that is Freud's critique. So there are neurotic reasons for refusing belief. So Jones, in my opinion, makes an important addition to the view of Freud. I still believe that Freud's thoughts upon religion are valuable and useful when it comes to when religion and spirituality becomes problematic. But Jones makes this addition that within your ability to see the problems, potential problems with religion, within that critical ability, there can be a blindness towards the critical approach itself. That was really complicated. But you see, I hope you see what I mean, that Jones makes an important addition, that being a critic of religion and such, that can be things going on within that person that would need or would be could be helped with looking into that critique, what's in it. Yeah. And here's another quotation, Meissner. One of the paradoxes of Freud's life is that although he was a self-professed agnostic, religion remained one of his predominant preoccupations. References to religion can be found among his earliest writings and letters. And Meissner asked himself, why was it that a godless you, as Freud referred to himself, would so preoccupy himself with God and the things of God? Yeah. And that I will come back to that later, what I would like to call the silent God. And here's an old Christian, I suppose, picture of God, the Christian God, the man above the clouds. You could say it's a child's picture of God, but I'm sure it's a picture that not this what do you say, concrete, but to have this feeling that someone, maybe male, someone residing out there is looking down on me and us to see how we're doing and see if maybe he could help out with something else. I think that's a quite common view on God. The next picture is a picture that I have borrowed somewhere from on the internet. And this corresponds to something I were talking about last week, that the God image within New Age spirituality, that was one of the things that made a deep impression on me conducting those interviews. The God image is somehow you said dizzy, somehow unclear, and I will get to that in a slide. God being both personal or unpersonal or neither, is both good and evil or neither. So at the core of that, I think that the question is this a God to relate to? Not as concrete perhaps as in the picture before, but is this a entity that you can be in a relation with? And my impression is that in New Age spirituality, many things obstruct that. So man is very often or more left by himself. You could say he set himself apart and being self-sufficient, or you can say that the thought system tempts or pushes him or her towards that. But man is about to be a God himself. Like it's about to step by step, like a flower, reach his or her full potential. Then he will be equal to God. Whatever you put in that word God, but you will be total, so to speak. And that's for me as a psychologist with an interest in these subjects, that what I just said, it puts up a lot of question marks, and it can make me concerned, and I described in the previous week that conducting those interviews, I got a lot of clear answers on most of my questions. Why things and how things works. New Age spirituality even have a solution to the theodicy problem. How can there be suffering and pain in the world if God is almighty, all-loving, and all-wise? That theologists and others have dealing with for centuries. New Age spirituality has an answer to that. So even there, the answers were clear and easy to follow, so to speak. But when it came to the questions regarding a divine, or the divine realm, or the God, the questions, the answers became very dizzy, some sort of conflicted, uneasy, and that made a deep impression on me. It concerned me, and it made me even feel sad. Later on, when I was confronted with those themes side by side, one of the things, there are a few more, but the theme dealing with God struck me. Yeah. When God is absent, more or less, or unrelatable, there is it's a little bit wrong order now, because I will get to a quotation later that says that man is not seeking something like the truth or regarding the laws in nature, Norse laws in the universe. Man is not seeking something, he is seeking someone. And that was a Christian point of view, from a Christian perspective. Something I've read when I was doing this study, and I think it's worth thinking. I think it's true. I think it's somehow true. And one of the signs or symptoms of that being the case is that even that there is no God in a traditional sense, there is this is a Swedish. Ersättning means what do you say? Instead of. And vakans is vacancy, like an empty room. But what was obvious in my interviews, and others have reflected upon this as well, even if there isn't a personal God, there are numerous instances that seems to fill the gap. And here's translated: a personal or even parent-like way of taking care of the individual. The individual encounters or meet in, for example, guardian angels and invisible guides. That is common phenomena in the New Age, alternative spiritual culture. Guardian angels, invisible guides, that has a big power and great knowledge and ability to contain the individual's whole existential situation, so to speak, the future, and so they are a great power. you can meet people, physical people that have reached the goal in their personal evolution. They are like gods, so to speak. They have total knowledge and total ability for kindness, love. And some of these phenomena you see in the case of religious cults, perhaps, but you even find it in the more unorganized spirituality. Then perhaps you find a certain writer, living or deceased, but a writer. Maybe someone has put out, you can have video clips or see video clips, but it's a person that has these greater abilities as well. Christ is the biblical Christ, the Christ within the Christian Church, that also has a great significance within the alternative New Age spirituality as well. In my interviews, Christ was often mentioned as someone who had this all these abilities. A difference is that within church, Christ is something else. He has abilities that no man can aspire to get. But within newer spiritualities, Christ is a role model, and in the end you will become like him. But he is a great example of someone who has reached the goal. Sometimes the Mother Earth seems to fill the gap after an absent God. Maybe that's not so much the case within New Age spirituality, but in other types of alternative spiritualities. And some of, in my interviews, I even heard about visitors from other planets, that they have been able to come here because they are higher evolved than mankind, and they have they keep a distance to us, and they sort of have what do you call it? They try to protect us from ourselves, so to speak. They hover around nuclear plants to nuclear fire, also military places, to be sure that we don't destroy ourselves and the planet by accident or by foolishness. So they have such sort of divine parent-like, if you like, role. Here's a sort of funny picture. This little guy sitting next to his, perhaps his grandfather, and he says that, yeah, well, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either. this I've been using this picture for a special subject, but within New Age alternative spirituality, there is what you can call can you say detronization, to put somebody out of work, to degrade someone, and that's one of the other themes that made an impression on me in those interviews, that almost every instance of being above the individual, so to speak, the parents, government, ultimately God, was degraded, so to speak. In the case of the parent-child constellation or the grandparent-child constellation, within this kind of spirituality, these different levels are erased, because you live forever, you come back once over and over again, and this time this little guy is grandchild to that man, perhaps, but the next time the roles can be reversed. Your mother can have been your sister, or the next time she will be your sister, and your father has been your little brother, perhaps, and like that. So this picture is kind of illustration of that facet of New Age spirituality. Here's that quotation in Swedish, that without God, spirituality tends to deteriorate, to sum it up. Man is not seeking something, he's seeking someone. And here's the another quotation of this James Jones. And this addresses a thing that I will get back to. But Jones, he seems to be a teacher of some kind. Sometimes, or he has pupils, students. Often when students have spoken at great length with me about how they do not believe in God, I ask them to tell me about the God they do not believe in, and they always answer. However cognitively compelling it may be, total atheism. Total atheism is a psychodynamic impossibility. Everyone has some image of God, even if the person rejects it as an object of faith. We move further, see what we find. Here's a term that is, I believe, is very useful. I mentioned it earlier in this episode. It's from John Welwood, an introducer of Buddhism in the West and psychotherapist. He passed away, I think it was last year. He's talking about the phenomena where your spiritual thought system or your spiritual activities is used to bypass your, so to speak, your ordinary life, or your actual life, your actual problems, or the actual the demands on you, so to speak. A spiritual bypass, or spiritual bypassing, is a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Yeah. Now we get to the last slide, and I will finish this soon. It's a real difficult subject, I think, and I want to stress that once again, that when I'm talking of this, I do it out from a psychological point of view. It's not from a Christian or even as a believer perspective. And I know I will get back to this subject and try to connect the strings and the dots in a more comprehensive way. But this is sort of I did a series this spring in Swedish, presenting that study I was talking about. I presented it, and somehow I came to an end. I felt that I had said just about what I could say and couldn't say. But still, there are questions and subjects that feel that is important to me to understand in a deeper sense, and the place, the role of God is one of those subjects. Let's see if something here in the last slide that I haven't brought up already. I think I go directly to the last point, the silent God. That was just maybe I've heard it somewhere before, but that was something I put down just before I started this broadcast. The silent God. I'm quite convinced that there is a God. No, that's not. I'm convinced that there is some representation within us that, at least in part, draws on your experiences from early on in life. And there's where attachment theory comes in. Your relation to those who were closest to you when you were very little and you needed a lot, and you needed to be taken care of. Those early relations is still, they form sort of a core within you. and that lies on a deeper level than or from a psychological point of view, that lies deeper than the God representation. And therefore I think that the silent God with the qualities of feeling that you are, if not taken cared of, but that you are not alone, that maybe it's not that someone is watching over you, but in some sense anyway, you're not alone. Things will work out often in the end, and that's such of feelings, a sort of security that you're not always able to point to the reasons for. It's not that you can say I feel, she feels secure because of that and that is at hands, but it's a deeper form of security. Or you have the other side of the spectrum, that you feel abandoned, watched over in a unpleasant way, punished, or variants of that. That's also qualities that can be inherent in this silent God. But one of my points is that when talking about this silent God, and this parallels with for example, Jones quotations earlier, is that the actual, if you actually have a belief or not, is not the important thing. I suppose you could be both agnostic and atheist, and it would still be relevant to talk about this inner representation of something that goes beyond you, that has a great power and the ability to be in touch with you, and so that is relevant whatever worldview you have. Yeah, and maybe you understand now where I started those two things I've watched yesterday, that why the program with a woman longing, seeking, and finally finding her father made such impression on me and felt relevant. And why the lecture of Swimme wasn't my cup of tea. And not because I think he's wrong or that's subject and his way of dealing with the subject is without interest. No, it's because it's a personal thing. Yeah. And in my opinion, that area of speculation and investigation and science and often attract New Age believers, and to my opinion, it sometimes is used like a bypass. All these things about thinking universe or working universe is what do you call it? What's the word? It's arouses you. It's a sort of, it's like a opium smoke, like Karl Marx said about religion. It's like a fume coming from that type of speculations. Speculations that one day maybe will prove themselves true. I don't know, but yeah, I'm interested in the psychological stuff. Now I am about to stop for today. I will there. I'm full. And you have to excuse me because I've changed to a bigger screen behind the camera. So I'm aware that my I suppose that when I'm looking around on the screen, I seems to be not present. Yeah, it was better before when I had a smaller screen. But anyway, I stop for today. I wish you a pleasant Sunday. I'm planning to do another episode next Sunday. I'm quite sure it will be on the same subject as today, and I will try to find it things that I have missed today that I think is important, and I will maybe try to reformulate some things and make it more consistent or yeah, but yeah, bye.